afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for coming at such short notice. You would have known that the CRC sat today to adopt the final report, and today's press conference is really just to table the ANC's thinking around the entire process, but also what went into the recommendations and the ANC's view on the outcomes of the process as well as the report. Here we have three comrades who serve on the CRC. We have the co-joint chairpersons, Comrade Stan Maila, who's the acting co-chairperson, and then there's Comrade Nzimande, who is the acting chairperson as well. Who is the co-chairperson. And then we have Comrade Smith, who serves on the committee and who used to be the chairperson when the process started. So what we'll do is Comrade Smith will read our statement, and thereafter he'll just address a few issues, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Well, thank you, Comrade Smith.
Thank you very much, and welcome to our colleagues from the media, and thanks for coming. I will read the statement very briefly and contextualize it, and then take questions, or we will take questions. The Constitutional Review Committee adopted the final report on the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution in Parliament today, as you are aware. The CRC was mandated by Parliament in March of this year to establish if there is a need to amend the Constitution in order to empower the state to expropriate land without compensation. Upon receiving this mandate, the CRC embarked on a nationwide consultative process involving members of the public and various stakeholders who expressed their views on the possible amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution. After an extensive public consultation process, the CRC has resolved that there is a need to amend Section 25. This is informed by feedback received from public hearings where citizens of our country overwhelmingly demonstrated the desire to amend the Constitution. You'll recall that the chairpersons had asked committees to give their recommendations before today, and this is what we had submitted 2 or 3 days ago. The first point is we acknowledge that there were different views on whether Section 25 of the Constitution is an impediment to land reform, especially as far as expropriation of land without compensation is concerned, and that clarity should be sought through an application to the Constitutional Court or directly through a test case scenario. The second observation that we made was that there were different views on whether title deeds should be issued to beneficiaries or whether the state should be the sole custodian of all land. We also recognize that there's an urgent need for the land reform program to be expedited to redress the historic injustices related to ownership patterns of land. The ANC also recognized that the law of general application as envisaged in Section 25 of the Constitution, together with any other land reform legislation, must be finalized and adopted as soon as possible. That any land reform measures taken must consider the impact of food security, stability of the agricultural sector and economy. It must take cognizance of investor confidence, financial exposure to banks and other financial institutions by commercial farmers, and must also result in adequate support for emerging farmers. The ANC said that the state must address the lack of capacity to implement land reform, that there was inadequate budget allocations meant for facilitation of land reform, and that the matters of corruption and collusion in the land reform program must be addressed. We also state that communities were very vocal on the need to restore their dignity, protect their cultural practices, and to ensure security of tenure for farm laborers and tenants, and that those must be entrenched. Members were afforded an opportunity and did undertake in their individual capacities to peruse the written submissions in consideration of the contents of these submissions. It is apparent that in many instances, written submissions were computer generated, there were duplications with the exact same content, and that only changes were those of the names and the submitters. We therefore resolved as ANC 1 that Section 25 of the Constitution must be amended to make explicit that which is implicit in the Constitution with regard to expropriation of land without compensation as a legitimate option for land reform, so as to address the historic wrongs caused by the arbitrary disposition of land, and in so doing ensure equitable access to land and further empower the majority of South Africans to be productive participants in ownership, food security, and agricultural reform programs. Our second resolution that we had presented to the committee, that a mixed ownership of land, which inter alia includes individual ownership, that is title deeds issued to beneficiaries, direct state ownership, trust and communal land custodianship must be ensured. We also recommended that Parliament must urgently establish a mechanism to effect the necessary amendments to the relevant sections of Section 25 of the Constitution. We said that the executive must ensure that all legislation related to land reform, we're talking about the Restitution Act, Expropriation Act, and so on, must be enacted as a matter of urgency. And we also said that the security of tenure for farm workers, farm tenants, and those residing on communal land held in trust must be assured. The above, ladies and gentlemen, is in line with the ANC's resolution taken at the 54th National Conference, which resolved that Section 25 of the Constitution should be amended to include a clause that will empower the state to expropriate land without compensation. The adoption, therefore, of this final committee report will bring about an end to policy uncertainty. The ANC has full confidence in the process which has led to the adoption of this report. Let us say that from the very initial mandate given to this committee, the entire process, in our view, has been fair, it has been transparent, and it has been democratic. We reject any view which seeks to undermine the views of the hundreds and thousands of South African citizens who have made this plea to Parliament. The final report we envisage will be the final report, as you know, was adopted today, and we envisage that the National Assembly will table the report before the end of November for debate in the House. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, let me just contextualize what the ANC has been doing. First of all, Section or Clause 10 of the Bill of Rights speaks to everyone has inherent dignity and the right to have their dignity respected and protected. That is in the Bill of Rights. And we, as the ANC, are of the view that the majority of South Africans had this very right and dignity trampled upon. And that must be rectified. President spoke about the original sin. And we think that that must be fixed up, and we are sure that this is going to help us. We also want to state, ladies and gentlemen, that those that are opposed to this, I'm talking about politicians or members of Parliament or political parties in this House that are opposed to the amendment, are really grappling at straws when they say that there was bullying and intimidation during the public hearings. You all know that many of these public hearings were televised. And I can assure you that where I chaired, everybody was allowed to speak, not only to speak, but to speak in the language of their choice. Nobody was denied the right to speak. Nobody felt threatened. And therefore, I think it's clutching at straws, and it's an attempt to discredit the process. And we must reject it. Also, this notion by the Democratic Alliance and others that President Ramaphosa, when he made the announcement in July, cut us off by the knees. We must debunk that. As we read, the ANC took a resolution at its Nasrec conference. And when President Ramaphosa was speaking, he was speaking as the president of the ANC on an ANC position. So to suggest that it somehow weakened the process of the CRC, I think is clutching at straws. And as it was said earlier on, every political party pronounces on its party positions. And so why mustn't Ramaphosa do the same for the ANC? And I think that we must deal with it with the contempt that it deserves. The final position that I'd want to make, ladies and gentlemen, is the whole process around the issue of we must go and test this thing in the Constitutional Court. The ANC is of the view that we can't outsource our responsibility to the judiciary. The judiciary can't be the default for what is in essence a political decision. We as politicians must take this political decision whether we amend the Constitution, and those that then want to take it to court should take it to court. But it can't be that Parliament as a default must go to the judiciary for what is in essence a political decision. And therefore we think that it is correct that we take it through the parliamentary process, and whatever happens thereafter, that we cross that bridge when we reach it. We thought it was important to say these things. The chair, the co-chair had given the committee position earlier on. This is the ANC's position. And Chair, thank you very much. We will take questions if there are.
Can I just check if the co-chairs in the capacity as ANC members would like to add anything?
Not at this stage.
Not that, okay. We are noting questions, colleagues. Okay, we'll start there. So we're noting questions. Then we'll come to Babalo. Any other questions so far? Okay, just those two questions for now, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Jan Gerber from News 24. I just want to know, this recommendation that you read just now is pretty much the same as what the EFF proposed this morning. And also, I'm quite interested in how did the parties supporting an amendment work together, if at all. If you can perhaps elaborate on that. Thanks.
Babalo?
Hi, my name is Babalo Ndenza from Eyewitness News. I'm just, Jan's question mine is quite similar. The EFF seems to be, claiming the bragging rights by getting this thing adopted by the committee. Do you see this as an EFF victory in any way? Or is the ANC, not really bothered by who will claim the success in getting this thing adopted? And I was at an opposition party briefing about an hour ago, just less than an hour ago, and some of the remarks that were made by, I think, a member of the DA and COPE was that it was just a way by the ANC and the EFF to, expedite their election prospects. It's an electioneering gimmick. What's your comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's deal with Jan's and your first point. When I started, I did indicate that the process was 3 days ago. Political parties were asked to present their recommendations to the committee, and you'd recall that we presented them. And what you see here is chapter and verse of the ANC's presentation. If you went to look at the EFF's presentation, it was quite different. So when these presentations were put forward by the various political parties, clearly political parties would have looked at all of them and tried to meet each other halfway, if necessary. And that's why UDM, Filtane, and the NFP and everybody else were totally comfortable with the presentation and recommendations made by the ANC in our submissions almost 3 days ago. But I don't think it's important about who presented it today. What is important is that we think that we've listened to the voices of South Africans when they said, amend the Constitution to make it explicit. It is implied, and maybe you and I can, because of our educational levels, read the implied part of it. But many South Africans that we spoke to in the rural areas said, please put it in there so that it's not contested in the court of law. So yes, I'm saying that the ANC, this is the ANC's recommendation, and you can go and check it up in the records. You probably do know that this is what we tabled in E249 3 or 4 days ago. Is this a sham for electioneering purposes? It's clearly not a sham, because people who understand know that the process of actually amending the Constitution is not going to happen until after the elections. Not because we want to or we don't want to, but the process that is expected and laid out in the Constitution just makes it impossible. So this is not about electioneering. If it was about electioneering, we would have done this thing 6 months ago to make sure that we meet the election date deadline. We are very clear that we're not going to meet the election date deadline, but we do know that we want to send a message to South Africans that we are very serious, that we're going to address the original sin in a comprehensive and a holistic way. So it's not a sham. It is not about electioneering. It's about making sure that we listen to the voices of South Africans. And I think that in doing what we are doing, we are actually meeting the expectations of South Africans.
Okay, we'll take the next round. We'll start with. Okay, can I just note? Then we'll start with you. Then we'll go. Okay.
I wanted to.
Okay. Yes, please.
Well, thanks very much. Maybe just in response to the last question, I don't think it's necessary to say whose victory is this, because there's no political party which can rightfully claim victory here. This is actually the people's victory. So that's just what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Myla. We'll start with Joseph, then we'll go to Marianne, then we'll go to Thabo.
Okay, I realize that maybe my question comes at the tail end of a process that started long ago, but I will ask it anyway. There is this notion that the explicitness or non-explicitness of the Constitution cost the government. I mean, we've had the ANC as the government with the Constitution. The Constitution was passed in 1996. There has been all this time, and the land restitution and land reform process has not even started. Where there were attempts, we have seen major failures because of underlying problems of non-support for people who are given land and all. How is the explicitness of the Constitution going to remedy the failures of government to actually implement what was there for it to be able to implement? And then, Mr. Smith, at the beginning of the hearings that I had you speak here in Parliament, you said this is not a referendum. And you've repeated that several times, that whatever happened here was not a referendum. But this morning I heard you say this, and I heard you repeat it now again to say the overwhelming majority of our people said that we should amend the Constitution. If it was not a referendum, what are you talking about in terms of the overwhelming majority of the people when it comes to those who who were at public hearings? But you and the other guys are not taking into consideration the overwhelming majority of those who wrote and said they do not support the amendment of the Constitution.
Marianne?
Hi, good afternoon, Marianne Merton, Daily Maverick. Very straightforward and simple question, I think, and I hope you can clear up my confusion. You've just said that it's not a sham, it's not related to electioneering. Quote, the process of actually amending the Constitution is not going to happen until after the election. Now, that I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is in sharp contradiction to the recommendation that was just adopted by the committee, which in point C says, Parliament must table, process and pass a constitutional amendment bill before the end of the 5th Democratic Parliament. The 5th Democratic Parliament would end before the elections. If you could clarify that, please.
Thabo?
Thank you. Linked to Marianne's question, I wanted to ask if this will not be done before the elections, what mechanism is then in place to ensure that the next parliament will then prioritize this issue or revive it? Because my understanding is that when the parliamentary term of, when the term of this parliament ends, sometime early next year, the business, everything that's on its agenda then becomes basically no longer relevant. The next parliament will determine its priorities, agenda, and so on.
Is there anyone else? No? Comment Smith? I'll comment Miley with that. Okay.
No, let me touch on the issue of the referendum. Obviously, this process was not a referendum. And the issue of majority of people doing this, majority of people doing that, it cuts across all the processes. In the written submissions, the report that we have before us does not shy away. It says the majority of those who made written submissions were of the view that the constitution must not be amended. And equally, in public hearings, people were saying the constitution should be amended. Now, what guided Parliament here was not the numbers of who said what. It was the quality of the debate and the quality of the debate shaped the product that Parliament has in its possession. Thank you very much.
You see, with the explicit and the implicit of the Constitution, what we are arguing is that whatever mechanism that can assist the process, it should be undertaken. Now, we've been living with implicity and nothing have happened. Now, if they tried and expropriate without compensation and somebody raise a constitutional matter in terms of, how strong you are working on, we are referred, the opposition parties are referring us to the legislation. If you read the TA submission, it says we must use the legislation to provide explicit. And we are saying no, because the Constitution is a supreme law. So if you provide clarity and certainty in the supreme law, then the rest will then follow easy. Even the law of general application will then follow. So as the ANC, we are disagreeing with that, with the proposition of the TA to say use the subordinate law to the Constitution to provide explicit to expropriation without compensation. So I think that's why we are saying it is the quality of the argument, and the quality of the argument is why it's not. While we're recognizing everything, but it's still not explicit enough to provide an easy option for government to expropriate. And therefore, the subordinate act, what Comrade Smith referred to, the expropriation bill, it will then give the grounds and the conditions, the detail of how this thing should happen. So you first create a principle in the Constitution, then you follow it up with all the relevant measures through a subordinate legislation, regulations, policies, programs, and resources to that effect. So you have to streamline. So really it was, and if you followed and I know you followed, all the arguments are similar, but the conclusions are different. The argument were about the economic situation, the food security, not having land and others having land, but the argument was the same, but the different conclusion. And hence we are saying equity. And it is already in the Constitution that it should be just and equitable. So that is why we did it. But let me deal with this one on the structure. We are saying that in the other clause of the recommendation, we are saying the Parliament must establish a structure that will take forward the process. And that structure and Parliament, when they fold its business on adjournment, the records, we use normally what is called legacy reports, and even previous resolutions. There is a way of packaging these things in such a way that in the 6th Parliament they can be resuscitated. Any member in the new Parliament, and ANC will be there, they will go back and resuscitate the process easily, because it would have been part of the records of the previous Parliament. So in essence, it would not be a process that will just lapse completely. It has options of being resuscitated. Thank you.
I think comrades have covered me, but let me just touch on the explicit. You know, it's not far-fetched that the willing buyer, willing seller option has frustrated land reform. In fact, the Freedom Front, in its current recommendation, says the willing buyer, willing seller must be the way to go. What we are saying here is that the Constitution must make it explicit that expropriation without compensation is but one mechanism, so that it's not challenged in court. So in the past it might have been implied, but we know the reality on the ground was that the dominant method was willing buyer, willing seller, which frustrated the process. Now you could argue, why didn't you go the other route? We are saying, let's deal away with why did you not go. Let's just say it is but one of the mechanisms. That's the explicitness that we're talking about. That it must not be contested in the constitutional court, that we then said we are going to expropriate without compensation in the public interest. It must be there in the Constitution. So that's the explicitness that we're talking about. And I think my comrades dealt with what happens in the next Parliament, Thabo, that it can be resuscitated in the next Parliament. And then, of course, Marianne, if you go to Section 74 of the Constitution, it actually gives you the process, that there must be a 30-day gazetting, there will be public hearings, there will be 30 days before whatever. And we just know if you do the sums that it's not going to happen. So I think that was the intention, that we were saying Parliament must set up this vehicle. This vehicle must be given the mandate to do what it needs to do. And in doing what it needs to do, we know that if you do the calculations, it's not possible. But the intention was, let Parliament set up this vehicle and let it give this vehicle a mandate.
Can we just have a comment on Zamanda, and then we'll come to you?
Yeah, just one, this aspect on the written submissions that we didn't touch. You know, if you've seen over 60 from highly respected entities, individuals from various sectors and spectrum, and they make a point. But in all of them, as I was indicating, the argument is one, it's issues of fear of the investor responses, economy, agricultural, food security, and all this and all. But the argument is one, and you don't find a legal argument that says you are legally wrong. I'm sure in your records, none of the presenters are saying it's legally wrong to put the principle of explicitity in the Constitution. They are just raising issues that are subsidiary or subordinate to put, but they're all not issues. They're important, highly important and vital, but not a legal argument against the amendment, including what the DA is submitting as its position. There's nothing that they're arguing on the legality of amendment to the Constitution. So that must be cleared up. Now, the issues of the submissions brought are that you have an opposition that has publicly pronounced COPE, it tells you that it has brought over 200,000 through the door. Freedom Front Plus, we know its position. It tells you this is what this is publicly, they tell you a political position. Then they bring the submissions. Race Relations brings 60,000. AfriForum, they've been everywhere. They've been even on oral presentation. So in essence, we therefore, I mean, as the ANC, we are saying, how are we so sure and certain that COPE didn't just bring the database, and now we are going through the database of COPE, database of their membership, to make an opinion on a database of COPE, of Freedom Front Plus, or even the position that is known from the race relations. So, but nonetheless, we did go and we did look. Hence, in our statement, we are saying that there are duplications in terms of email, and we are stating this, for a record from the ANC side, that there was no complaint from any South African that was brought to the attention of the committee that there was no attention given to their submissions. Thank you, Chair.
And last round. Okay. Anyone else other than Mariam? Okay. We'll take Mariam, then we'll be done.
Sorry if I'm delaying it. I just want to be absolutely clear. You have just adopted a report with recommendation that the constitutional amendment bill must be before the fifth democratic parliament, before the elections. At the same time, you're admitting that you know it's not going to be possible. So there's a contradiction that casts a negative light on the report that has just been adopted. Will the report, before it goes up for debate and discussion, be amended to maybe take out this, it needs to be done before the end of the fifth democratic parliament bit? Thank you.
Yeah. It certainly is possible. I think what we would do, we will tighten up the wording to say exactly what we mean. And what we mean is what I said to you. Maybe the wording was not proper English, put it that way. But the intention is for that body that is set up, whether it's the Justice Committee or an ad hoc committee, to be given a mandate. What is very clear is that there will be no voting on the actual constitutional amendment before elections. I hope that clarifies it. There will be no voting on it. It's just not practically possible.
And just to add, you see, the parliamentary process allows if you remember, we've extended, we've been requesting for extensions and extensions. If a committee, in its view, on consideration of the subject matter and the program before it, feels that they will not meet the mandate, they revert back to the mandating authority, in this instance would be the two houses of parliament, and say, look, we've got this mandate that you resolved on, but we think we will not meet. We propose that you adopt this resolution. And that is how Parliament its processes are not as stiff and not being able to be interacted with from within. So we think that structure, even if this report is not amended and in what it says, that committee, once established, will determine the course of its work, the roadmap, the program, and it will then pronounce back to the mandating authority, the two houses, and say, look, we think the fifth term will lapse, and therefore we think this work will end at this level, and it must be reserved in this fashion.
Thank you, Comrade Nzimande. Thabo seems to have a burning issue. I'll give it to you, but Comrades, just bear in mind that there is a sitting of the House that's currently underway.
No,
Thabo?
Just your thoughts, Mr. Smith. What then happens in the event that the ANC returns to this parliament with a significantly reduced majority?
It won't happen.
It won't happen. but secondly, as Chair Maile said, this is not about the ANC. This is about the majority of the people of South Africa. I don't care who is in power tomorrow. I think the pressure. When I say I don't care, I'm limited to change that. I do care. But what I'm saying is it doesn't matter. I think the pressure of South Africans for land reform will exist regardless of which party is in power. Because even today, the parties that are opposing the amendment of the Constitution are saying land reform must take place. So that there must be land reform, everybody agrees. It's just the method of how. So I can assure you, Thabo, in the 6th Parliament, this process will continue and be concluded.
An individual member can resuscitate it even from minority.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have a good day further.
And you.
If my the only member, the only ANC, you still raise a matter.
Yeah.
All right, and so we come out of that ANC Parliamentary Caucus briefing. We're going to go for a short break and have more news for you thereafter.
We are in the 4th Industrial Revolution.
Things aren't the same anymore.
Technology is taking over much of what we do. That includes how we make payments.
Blockchain is the future.
On Network, we have robots, hackathons, and tech entrepreneurs.
Making sure that your business is well known across all borders. We use social media.
That's Network with me, Pumela Zondi, on Saturdays at 20:30 and Sundays at 17:30.
Fashion, travel, music, food, and food. Did I mention food?
We at Trends Travel love bringing you cuisines from around the world.
Forbes US have declared Gabonese